serious. Now, before I finish, because I know I'm the one who's sitting actually between you and the panel, I think there are some other things we ought to be very strongly aware of. The worst is euphemism, I suppose. Again, Orwell was very tight on this and very hard. Euphemism, in other words, the invention of pretty words for nasty things. Sometimes we win a round or two here. I don't think any politician would any longer describe civilian casualties as collateral damage. They used to. I don't think they would dare to do that now. I think we won that one. But what is currently annoying me the most is the use of the word abuse to describe the rape and torture and molestation of underage children. It's not abuse. Abuse is what I do to Johnny Walker Black Label. It's a victimless crime to some extent. Looking for an easy and excusing word for rape and torture and molestation of children is itself a crime, and actually abets the crime, and makes it seem as if there's no case to answer except that of sin and repentance, instead of what is really necessary now, which is law and, most important word of all, justice. So let's have no more of that. And let's have our press stop using this crummy word to describe this terrible situation. I think that the reporting of poll data as if it was news, newspapers, when they can't be bothered to research anything or do any work, commission an opinion poll and then report its findings as if it was front-page news already by itself. That's bad. And it leads to crummy expressions like approval rating. Why do we allow a word like approval rating to circulate? I remember seeing a poll in the Los Angeles Times at the moment when Ronald Reagan had, you may remember this, a cancerous polyp in his bottom. Up his ass, to be exact. I mean, let's not be... Well, the readers of the Los Angeles Times were invited to, in an opinion poll, to say, did they think that this polyp would, A, be safely surgically removed, B, would come back, or C, would go into remission. So everyone was consulted as if they were experts on the state of affairs in the president's rear end. This is stupid, and the poll data language of consensus that goes with it, I think, is very stupid too. And it's a substitute for news. It's a substitute for research, for reporting, for analysis. It's junk and needs to be denounced as such. The word radical to me is a precious word. It has a very honorable history in the Romantic movement of the 19th century and in many movements associated with it. I think it's worth preserving. I don't want to hear that the scrofulous cleric, Mr. al-Laki in Yemen, is a radical cleric when he's talking about a return to the Middle Ages, doing without the services and talents of all women, talking about the torture and killing of homosexuals and the random infliction of violence on civilians. He should be called the reactionary cleric, al-Laki, not the radical one. It robs the language of a word if we carry on in this way. The word community pisses me off. Who isn't in a community now? It's particularly bad in my adopted country and in my hometown of Washington, D.C. There's the defense community, all right, if you must. The intelligence community for the CIA is an outrage. The donor community for those who seek to influence politics by giving money under the table is appalling. And the ultimate reductio ad absurdum of it, I did actually once read in a very guardedly written account of organized crime, the Sicilian business community. You hear the word community, keep your hand on your wallet. Tragedy is another word that I think one cannot function without, and is a word of which the language must not be robbed. There are two definitions of tragedy. One is the Hegelian one. I think this is the most acute. The tragedy is when two rights come into conflict, when there's an apparently irreconcilable combat between two rights. That's a tragic situation. And there's the Greek one, the Sophoclean, the Euripidean one of tragedy being the fatal flaw in a great person, the one that will undo him, that will set his purposes at naught. These are important considerations. they're morally important, and they're dramatically important. They're aesthetically important. Tragedy is not when disco-going princess has traffic accident. That's not tragedy. It may be an unhappy business, but it's not tragedy. And the use of vicarious identification, in other words, wearing green ribbons about people or yellow ones, but people we don't know, a waste of feeling, a waste of emotion on vicarious identification, is another sickly, euphemistic seduction into which the media continually lure us. Well, I've got some other examples too, but we'll save all that for the time when it's your turn. I just would close with Orwell as well. If you finish 1984, when you finished it, you'll find that there's an appendix by the author. It's called A Dictionary of Newspeak. It's only a few pages, but the idea of Newspeak is to make certain thoughts unutterable, especially any thoughts of freedom. So there will be no word for it. So it isn't that certain thoughts or opinions would be banned, is that they could not in language, in English, be formulated. And for a counterexample, Orwell cites a sentence that couldn't be rendered into Newspeak, for which there could be no Newspeak translation. And it goes like this: we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed with certain inalienable rights, and so on. Well, long may that remain untranslatable into any long Dubois, and let us all strive to stand by not just the language, but the freedom, the democracy, the aspiration, the beauty, and the dignity to which we are entitled as a birthright. Thank you.
Something that you talked about, Nathan, which was authenticity and the need to be authentic. I often feel rather depressed when I watch an interview like Kerry O'Brien on the 7:30 Report, and it becomes a game. It becomes a kind of a carefully framed question to try and trap out a politician. And so that to be safe, and you mentioned risk-free, that's what generates this kind of language. And in the end, I think, well, I've just listened for that for 10 minutes and it really generated nothing of value for public debate. And I guess I'd like to ask both, all three of you, if you have a comment on it, what can we do to try and cut through that, to actually get more authenticity in that exchange so that we can have a more open and democratic discussion?
Well, yeah, look, I think one of the problems with the news cycle speeding up as insanely as it currently is that we now have silence all the time that has to be filled with something, and whether it's polls that are commissioned and then reported upon, or whether it's constant doorstops. I mean, as Premier, I guess you were doing it one a day. Tony Blair, at the end of his term, gave quite a fascinating, aggressive, a bit hypocritical speech about the media, where he talked about the savagery of the media. He talked about the media being like a feral beast destroying everything in its path. Now, I think it's a tiny bit tricky coming from Tony Blair, a man who early in his term entered the North Island peace talks and said, "This is not a time for sound bites. I feel the hand of history upon my shoulder." So, fair go, but for shake of the sauce bottle or whatever.
It was suck of this.
Well, that's the thing. It's actually supposed to be
right,
suck,
yeah.
As Martin Amos wrote to attempt so little by way of expression and still to fuck that up. But it's a problem of needing to generate matter and content. And I think that because we see our politicians all the time, we're constantly checking in on them. We don't let them have time to reflect, to develop an opinion, or even to change their mind on something. I mean, that's something that I think is a bit wrong with the way we work. So
is the answer to be less available, or to give them time, change the formats of the interviewing and the television and the radio that they do?
I just don't think that's it.
You can try that, and it'll be reported as missing in action. There's one of the fundamental differences in the way we approach language if you're a journo or a politician, is